Welcome to Viewpoint on ILTV, where we bring you leading voices in the Middle East and beyond. In this special, we're taking you inside the Israel-Gaza war to hear from stakeholders, thought leaders, and decision makers. I'm Emily Schrader, and today we're speaking with attorney and founder of the End Jew Hatred movement, Brooke Goldstein. Brooke is a human rights attorney, an award-winning filmmaker, author and founder and executive director of the Lawfare Project, as well as the founder of End Jew Hatred, the movement, and the co-founder of the Zionist movement. She's also a widely known television commentator and has given lectures around the world. Brooke, thank you so much for joining us today. I just want to start by asking you, how did you get involved in all this? How did you get started, and what inspired you to be such an activist for Jewish civil rights?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me, Emily. I'm such a big fan of yours. We work together, and I admire you, admire everything you do, and I've wanted to sit here with you for a long time.
Mutual.
So thank you for having me. So how did I get started? I was actually in law school, and I ended up producing a documentary film it was called The Making of a Martyr, and I spent 2 years in and out of Jenin, Ramallah, Tulkarm, and Nablus, and I secured firsthand interviews with leaders of terrorist organizations such as Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades. I went into Israeli prisons. I interviewed children who were arrested for participating in violent activities or attempting to blow themselves up. And I made this film. I co-produced it, called The Making of a Martyr, and it was a documentary film that exposed the illegal state-sponsored recruitment and indoctrination of Muslim children towards violence, which unfortunately is still an issue today. And we followed up with a piece about UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency, which, as you know, operates schools and allows Hamas to come in and recruit the children. And so as a young attorney, I identified this legal argument that the abuse of innocent Muslim children to train them towards jihad is not only the root cause of why we have conflict in the Middle East, but it's the greatest crime against humanity, because you're ruining the future of that society when you have hate education. And the only way to get rid of conflict in the Middle East is to end the hate education, right? No child is born with Jew hatred. Jew hatred is taught, it is indoctrinated, it is taught in the schools, in the textbooks, by the television programs, sometimes by the religious leaders. And this is a crime against these children. So that's how I initially, got into this space. And once we ended up winning...
What year was this?
This was in 2006 when we won the Audience Choice Award for Best Film at the United Nations Documentary Film Festival.
It's really remarkable that we're still dealing with the exact same issues.
Exactly. And those of us who were screaming at the top of our lungs about what is going on and how the United States is aiding and abetting the premeditated murder of Muslim children by continuing to fund UNRWA. We've been talking about this, and yet nobody was listening. And we've been warning about what was going to happen. And now you have an entire society that's been not only held hostage by an Islamist terrorist group, but whose own children, their minds have been kidnapped, and they have been indoctrinated, and now the children are being used, as you see, as human shields, so that terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah are able to claim lawfare, are able to blame Israel for the civilian casualties and the human shields. And wasn't it just discovered, was it yesterday, that Hamas's headquarters in the south are in a children's school?
Not only that, but there have been countless tunnels discovered under UNRWA buildings, and we know the collusion between the two has been ongoing for many years, apparently since at least 2006,
right,
with the, the release of your film. Moving forward to October 7th, I know you're a lifelong Jewish rights activist, but in addition to that, I'm curious how you see the situation change, how you saw the situation change after October 7th.
Well, I'm happy you call me a Jewish rights activist, because I really hate the term pro-Israel. Because what we're really doing, we're not trying to convince people to love a foreign country. We're engaged in civil rights activism on behalf of the Jewish community as a minority community. My job is not necessarily convincing haters to love us, but empowering the Jewish community to stand up for themselves when they're discriminated against.
One of the ways in which your work has been, I think, most influential, especially as of late, after October 7th, is through Lawfare. Now, you are the founder of the Lawfare Project. Can you tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing there and why it's so important to legally fight against discrimination against Jewish minorities?
Yeah, so you asked before also what changed after October the 7th. And I think that there was an awakening to what people in the counterterrorism community have been warning about for years, which is the indoctrination and frankly, what I believe to be the greatest subversive influence campaign that has ever taken place on this planet, which is the destruction of the American democracy from within, the billions of dollars of funding coming in from Iran to fund the protest and the havoc and the pro-Hamas mobs on the streets of New York and DC and LA and Paris and London and so forth, combined with the education that's been happening for 15 years, funded by Qatar to the tune of $1 billion a year, where our youth are being radicalized in our institutions of higher learning. And of course, you have the degradation of liberal democracy, and in my opinion, almost an entire party now that has adopted a philosophy, this so-called woke progressive philosophy, which is afuch, which is the opposite of what traditional liberalism is, which believes in freedom of speech and believes in freedom of association and so forth, and the criticism of religion.
Sorry to cut you off.
Okay.
I want to know, how is it that Jews, the Jewish community, got pushed outside of this whole so-called, self-declared progressive movement?
Well, it was obvious. I mean, this is what happened with Jews who became communists and Jews who were, democratic socialists in Germany at the beginning of the rise of the Nazi Party. Is we always have this notion that if we reject our identity, then we will be accepted. And these movements, all of the minority rights movements, the civil rights movements, were started in America with the help of the Jewish community. The NAACP was founded with the help of the Jewish community. We had Rabbi Heschel marching hand in hand with Martin Luther King for the black civil rights movements of the 50s and 60s. Initially, it was Jewish women who launched the Me Too movement before they were pushed out by people like Linda Sarsour and Tamika Mallory. That whole thing, was perverted. And so that's why we launched about 3.5 years ago, the End Jew Hatred movement, because Jews have always been marching for others. It's always been Jews for Black Lives Matter, Jews for gay rights, or Jews for women's rights. But now is the time for a Jews for Jewish rights movement. There has never been a Jewish civil rights movement in America. Isn't that just a remarkable thing to think about?
It really is, especially considering the fact that there is, not like other countries, but there is a history of even institutionalized anti-Semitism, not allowing Jews and blacks through the main entrances, not allowing Jews and blacks into certain areas, certain country clubs, even until the 90s. So it really is remarkable that there hasn't been any kind of push before when it comes to civil rights. I wanted to ask you a little bit more specifically about the legal aspect. What do you think can or should be done about some of these pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah demonstrations, if we can call them that, mobs we've seen popping up all over the United States and Europe and Canada, as you mentioned?
Well, the full force of the law needs to be used against them. The degradation of a democracy is when there is no rule of law. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing. We represented a gentleman named Matt Greenman, who was viciously beaten up on the streets of New York by people who were engaged in a pro-Hamas or pro-Palestinian protest. And we had enormous pushback from the Manhattan DA's office to prosecute this as a hate crime. Eventually, we had to go to the feds, and we got federal hate crimes and conspiracy charges, and the man was subsequently sentenced. But there is a reluctance, unfortunately, on behalf of the government and on behalf of law enforcement to see what is happening as a civil rights issue. You mentioned before, it's not the same to be black now as it was 30 years ago. It's not the same to be a woman in the workforce as it was 10 years ago. Why is anti-Jewish discrimination still an accepted form of behavior? Why is it still socially acceptable? And the reason is because we have formulated this and described it as a political issue. Right? If you're angry at Israel, it is okay because it's politics to take it out on someone because they're Jewish. This is the ultimate form of racism, right? If I'm angry at the Chinese government for the way they handled COVID, I can't go to a local Chinese American student, discriminate against him, refuse to allow him entry into a class. That's racism 101. But it's acceptable with the Jewish community because it's all seen as political issues, right? Zionism is a political point of view. It's not part of your ethnic, cultural, and religious identity, or so we're told. So the utility, and to sum it up, and to answer your question, the utility of civil rights litigation, what I call impact litigation, is to center this as it should be, a minority rights issue. The Jewish community is the oldest, most persecuted minority community in human history. We deserve equal protection under the law. We deserve to have our civil rights enforced, and we should not be responding to anti-Jewish discrimination with pro-Israel advocacy. We should be responding to it by fully enforcing all of our rights. And that's why it's so important. And if you take anything from this episode, there is nothing wrong with a Jew standing up for him or herself, right? I can't tell you how many times a family or a student comes to me and the stories they tell me of anti-Jewish discrimination are horrific, but they're afraid. They're afraid to sign on as a plaintiff. They're afraid to complain lest they be retaliated against. We have to shed that fear. We have to step into our power. We have to actually accept that we've been victimized. Okay, we've been victimized, but we cannot remain victims. And we must stand up for ourselves in courts of law, in the streets, which is what we do with the End Jew Hatred movement, and also, of course, in the media.
Now, you spoke a lot about the need to use the law to protect Jewish civil rights, in particular in the United States. You are leading, through the Lawfare Project, a lawsuit against Columbia University. I believe it's still ongoing. Can you tell us a little bit about this case? I mean, Columbia has been all over the news because of these anti-Israel, pro-Hamas encampments on campus. We've seen shocking scenes of anti-Semitism, explicit calls to violence in some of these demonstrations. What's going on, and what is the Lawfare Project's case on this issue?
So thank you for asking. We are very proud to represent a student, not just at Columbia University, but we also represent the 10 students who were locked in the library at Cooper Union while a pro-Hamas mob was banging on the window, threatening violence, and they had to be escorted out of the building under police protection. We represent a student at Carnegie Mellon University, the third largest recipient of funds from Qatar. And there's one thing in common. All of them were discriminated against. They were harassed. They were treated differently. They were denied equal access to university facilities, and they were retaliated against because they're Jewish. Always because they're Jewish. And obviously the excuse of those who engage in civil rights violations are, well, it's just politics. We're just protesting. We're protesting the policies of the Israeli government. And yet the Jewish students are being treated differently because they're Jewish. And that's the essence of all of our cases, whether it's against schools, whether we're suing hospital systems. We are providing representation to the Jewish community when they've been treated differently because of their ethnic, cultural, religion, or because of where they're born. We sued the National Lawyers Guild for enforcing a so-called BDS resolution for refusing to do business with an Israeli company. And what's so interesting is we made the novel argument, which is obvious on its face now if you look back at it. But what BDS is national origin discrimination. You are refusing to deal with someone because of where they're born. And just like I can't have a restaurant with a sign that says no Chinese allowed, or a club that says no Africans allowed, so too is it illegal in the United States to operate a business and refuse to deal with someone because they were born in Israel. And so we use impact litigation, civil rights litigation, the same way that every other minority community has done in the United States. And we use it to enforce the rights of the Jewish community.
Now, have you faced any kind of retaliation or discrimination for so much of this impact litigation? I know recently there was a story about some of the administrators, I think, speaking about you in a WhatsApp chat. What kinds of things have you, as a leader in this field, experienced or faced?
Well, obviously, that WhatsApp story that broke in Winnipeg, it just shows the vile nature of the administrators that we're working with. It's the same that happened in Columbia University when it was shown that the administrators were texting each other, making fun of the Jewish students who were complaining and appealing to them to help them. But I think you don't focus on the hate. But what we do need to focus on in terms of the pushback is what I mentioned and alluded to a little bit before, is the reluctance of the Jewish community to forcefully stand up for themselves, right? After so many years of persecution and genocide, we have this epigenetic trauma that Noah Tishby talks a lot about, where we feel that maybe we'll have a better chance of survival if we hide, or if we assimilate, or if we put our head down and we ignore what's happening. Well, I think history has proven the opposite is true. And one of the most important things you need to do to fight in democracy, we don't make change through violence. We make change through the legal and legislative systems. And if you think about it, every single right, as an American, that I enjoy is, if not written out explicitly in the Constitution, was a product of a seminal civil rights case, right? So Roe v. Wade, which at one point guaranteed the ultimate women's right to choose, but has, now been overturned partially. Or Brown v. Board of Education, when one case got rid of segregation in American schools, desegregated American schools. The Asian community took advantage of the legal system as they should have, and they sued Harvard University and reversed affirmative action. Where are the seminal Supreme Court cases on behalf of the Jewish community? This is what we aim to achieve. We aim to bring these groundbreaking civil rights cases so that we can shape the fabric of our society, which, by the way, our cases don't just benefit the Jewish community. You set a precedent in a court of law that's equally applicable to any other minority as well. And what we are saying is you cannot, no matter how much you hate, whatever your politics are, whatever you think of a foreign country thousands of miles away, that is no justification to engage in discrimination against someone because of how they look, because of their skin color, because of their religion, or because of where they were born.
I want to shift a little bit to speak about Israel more specifically, as the legal issue has been a huge problem for the state of Israel during this war. We're dealing with the ICC, we're dealing with the ICJ, a lot of international lawfare being weaponized against the state of Israel. As a legal expert, what is your take on this issue that Israel is facing? How should Israel be responding to the accusations and the even potential arrest warrants, for Netanyahu, for the defense minister Gallant? What's your response to this lawfare?
Well, number one, it's important to make the world understand that this isn't just an issue for Israel. I mentioned the concept of creating precedents in international law. And because every single Western democracy is fighting on this asymmetric battlefield against theologically motivated terrorists, facing terrorists that hide behind their own civilians, that use their civilians in schools as rocket launching pads and as shields, and recruit children for suicide homicide activities happening in Afghanistan, happening in Iraq. You have the same happening a little bit, in Yemen with the child soldiers and Sudan. These are issues that every Western democracy is facing. And if we allow precedents in international law to be set against Israel, which, by the way, goes above and beyond what is even required by the laws of armed conflict to comply, then all Western democracies will suffer from this, number one. Number two, and I've written about this, it was a huge strategic mistake to go before the ICJ and to legitimize this illegitimate court, which, by the way, a lot of information is now going to start coming out about the connection between Iran as well as the financial incentives that were given to the South Africans to bring this case. And what you said, it's lawfare. It's the use of the law as a weapon of war. The ICJ and these judges have no authority whatsoever to judge and restrict Israel as it fights on this asymmetric battlefield with the sole goal of not just protecting its own civilians, but protecting the civilians who are being used as human shields. We cannot legitimize these kangaroo courts. And unfortunately, we've created this industry of responding in kind to lawfare. Now, I have to admit, I was a part of it. Right? There was a long time ago where, 10 years ago, we were writing briefs and we were dissecting the arguments. But I think, we switch strategy. The time is to go on the offense. It's not to be on the defense. It's to use the law for our benefit, because the truth is on our side, the law is on our side, and we've spent so much time and effort organizing a legal defense. The time now should be used to organize a legal offense.
Well, you may have just answered my last question. We are running out of time, but I wanted to ask you a very broad question, not an easy one, but a broad one. Can we defeat anti-Semitism? And if so, how?
Well, we call it Jew hatred now. But and I'll tell you why, because not many people know this. It is so important to choose your words carefully. Words are everything. The language we use to describe our situation basically dictates our situation. And anti-Semitism, not many people know, is a term that was invented by German eugenicists to justify, in a pseudo-intellectual way, what they thought to be the study of the Semitic races, which is not just Jewish, okay? It's not anti-Semitism, it's not just Jewish, as inferior to the Aryan race. Now, Ronald Lauder once told me that when he went to a cocktail party and he said, well, that's anti-Semitic, people didn't really, bat an eye. But when he accused someone of being a Jew hater, he got a more visceral reaction. Because there's no question as to what Jew hatred is. And if you are against hatred against blacks or hatred against Asians or gays or Muslims, so too must you be against hatred against Jews, or you are the bigot. And I said in the beginning, and I'll conclude with this, nobody is born with Jew hatred in their heart. Obviously, hatred is an emotion, but Jew hatred is taught, it is indoctrinated. And of course, there is a possibility of getting rid of it. But it is so deeply ingrained, unfortunately, in the Islamist society right now, in Gaza, under the Palestinian Authority. A lot of radical Islam focuses on hatred, not just against Jews, but against
even
inside
infidels,
the UN, against the jihad. This is a taught phenomenon. And that's why, and I started my career off it, and I will probably end my career with the same lesson. Children are innocent. Okay, no child deserves to be taught to hate Jews or to hate themselves or to commit homicide, suicide for the sake of killing Jews or killing infidels. This is a crime against humanity. And when we get to the root cause of the issue, which is education, we can solve this problem. But the second thing to that, and I'll conclude, Black Lives Matter did not get rid of anti-Black racism. And the Me Too movement did not get rid of male misogyny. But what they did is they made it socially unacceptable to engage in certain behavior or to say the N-word, or, nobody wants to be like Harvey Weinstein, because what they did is they imposed consequences for that type of behavior. And the raison d'etre of the End Jew Hatred movement is to empower Jewish communities to ensure there are consequences when they are discriminated against, or when they are, subjected to Jew hatred. And we do it through the legal system with the Lawfare Project by filing civil rights cases. And we do it through the End Jew Hatred movement with grassroots mobilization, where we empower communities. We have click-send emails, we do protests. There's a whole lot of things that we do, and we ensure results. And results means that you create a deterrent effect, that if you engage in this behavior, you will get a result, whether you're held accountable in court or you're going to have a protest outside that might potentially affect your business or give you bad press. And hopefully you will be deterred from behaving this way, so that slowly it becomes socially unacceptable once again, that people are shunned and they are pointed at, and everybody agrees that what they are doing is wrong. And I think this is the essential concept of separating pro-Israel advocacy from Jewish civil rights advocacy. Because no matter, again, what you think of Israel, we must get people to understand that you cannot treat Jewish people differently. You cannot discriminate against us as a minority community because you have a certain political opinion.
It's so interesting. I know I said last question, but I'm going to say one more thing. It's so interesting that you're speaking about how you can't discriminate against Jews as a minority group, the same as you wouldn't against any other minority. And yet, I feel like, especially in the United States, with the battle on campus right now, we're seeing that there is an entire movement dedicated towards pushing Jews out of those spaces, out of that concept of a historically oppressed minority. And so much of that is being motivated and funded by Qatar and Iran, the Islamic Republic, and what they're doing to put Jews in a different category, to say no, Jews, they're all the Zionists, and it's Israel and it's a political issue. So on the one hand, we're dealing with, a historically oppressed minority, and on the other hand, we're dealing with opposition saying that we're not. I don't know if you agree with me on this challenge that we're facing, but I think it's kind of almost unique position for a minority group to be in, because you don't see an effort to the tune of billions of dollars to claim that Asian Americans are secretly all Chinese agents.
Right.
Yet you do see that with the Jewish community, especially from the funding of Qatar, from the disinformation of the Islamic Republic. Is that something that you guys have touched on or dealt with at both End Jew Hatred and the Lawfare Project?
Yes, and I think it was actually touched on very wisely by Netanyahu when he just gave his speech before Congress. These are useful idiots. All of the white 17, 18-year-old students who've never set foot in the Middle East, who are being sold this garbage, right, about progressivism and human rights and minority rights activism. And if you're gay and you're advocating, for an Islamic state of Palestine, on its face, you can see how insane it is. And the progressive movement obviously is anything but progressive. They've perverted liberalism. And frankly, it has nothing to do with the Jews. Israel is a decoy, right? The Jews are like the canary in the coal miner's tunnel. We're the first to go. We're the first to be discriminated against. But what you have right now, and this is why I really don't like the description of pro-Hamas protesters, we have pro-terror mobs that are using Israel or whatever's happening in the Middle East as an excuse to destabilize the United States, to destabilize this democracy and sow terror and fear, and to undermine our ability to govern ourselves and see clearly between what is right and what is wrong. Just like Netanyahu said, you either stand on the side of people who are burning babies in ovens and raping and murdering women and kidnapping Americans, or you stand on the side of a democracy that's trying to fight and defeat this evil. And unfortunately, the population in the United States right now, the polls are saying between, I think the ages are 18 to 24, are so morally confused because of the garbage education that they've been fed by Qatar, right, and China and Russia that have also funded our education. They don't know what's up or down anymore.
Yeah, it's very, very disturbing reality. But of course, the work that you are doing at Lawfare Project, as well as End Jew Hatred, is tremendously important to the American Jewish community and the global Jewish community. So with that, we will wrap up. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Brooke Goldstein, founder of the Lawfare Project and the End Jew Hatred movement. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.